I'm giving the orders from now on. I'm gonna teach them all. Are we having fun yet?
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the classic 1992 Jean-Claude Van Damme film Universal Soldier. The film is directed by Roland Emmerich and stars, of course, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, Ali Walker, Ed O'Ross and Ralph Muller. Now the film, initially we are in Vietnam. And we are accompanying Luke Devereaux and Andrew Scott, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren. They're in the midst of the Vietnam War, and essentially Dolph Lundgren's character, Andrew Scott, goes mad and kills some innocents. This leads to a confrontation between him and Luke Devereaux. They end up essentially killing each other, and then they're put on ice. And then the film shoots forward 20-odd years, and they have been added to an experimental program called the Universal Soldier Program, where dead soldiers or soldiers that were pronounced dead have been experimented on to turn them into super soldiers. So we see at the beginning of the film, we see them in action, flawless. They do this operation where they rescue civilians at a dam. It goes really, really well. But there is a news reporter, Veronica, who wants to investigate a little bit further. So she discovers the secret of the Universal Soldier Program, and she ends up escaping with Jean-Claude Van Damme's character Luke Devereaux, who started to have flashbacks of his life before in Vietnam, especially. And they go on the run, and then they are chased down by the Universal Soldiers, led by the now self-aware and villainous Dolph Lundgren's character Andrew Scott. Right, what are my thoughts on Universal Soldier? Well, this was, I think, I might be wrong in saying this, but I know it wasn't Roland Emmerich's first film, but I think this was certainly the film that put Roland Emmerich on the map. And as we know, he went on to obviously to do things like Independence Day and Day After Tomorrow and so on and so forth. He was the disaster movie king for many, many years. But this certainly highlighted his skills to Hollywood, this film. And I remember being really excited for this film when it came out. At the time when this came out, I was a big fan of action stars of the time, obviously Arnold, Stallone, Seagal, Van Damme, all that kind of stuff. So I was really super excited to check this one out. And I remember the first time I saw this, I was a little bit underwhelmed. And after rewatching it for this film, I kind of still feel the same a little bit. I mean, I've obviously seen this a few times over the years, but it's a good few years since I've seen this, which is why I wanted to rewatch it for this review. And it's quite an unbalanced film that has some really good bits in the film, as you would expect with Roland Emmerich, really highly polished, slick action, and some standout moments in the film, you know, like the chase with the buses and things like that is very, very good. And some of the fight scenes, the diner scene with Van Damme when he's discovering food is very good, very light. So there are definitely moments in this film where it's very, very entertaining, but there are also moments in this film where it's kind of like unbalanced for the most part. Now, at this point in Van Damme's career, he was definitely on the rise in regards to his star power. Was this his first, what you would call, big cinema hit? Probably. It went on after this for a number of years, like, you know, with his Time Cops and things like that and Hard Targets and stuff, you know, where he was quite prominent in cinema releases, and his star was definitely rising. And I think Van Damme does a decent job here. However, I think the performance needed, if you like, obviously the physical side of it, he excelled at in this film. But I think the acting required in this film at this stage in his career, he wasn't able to deliver, you know, like this innocence of this almost like reborn person, to rediscovering himself and stuff. And I think like I say, they mentioned the stuff in the diner. I think he does quite well, but he's been quite good at the comedy side of stuff. Van Damme. I don't think anyone's really massively explored that enough with Van Damme. I do think he has got some good comedy timing going on. And there are moments where it certainly shines here, and I think in the hands of a less talented director, I think he would have probably come off far worse, Van Damme. But I'm not really criticising him particularly. You know what I mean? He does reasonably well here in this role. I just think, like I say, I think if it was these days, a role like this they would probably cast the actor first and then look at the physical side of stuff. Well, in them days, they kind of recruited the physical side first and then hoped that it could rise up in regards to the acting performance. These days, I think that's definitely been flipped. However, he's a little bit overshadowed in this film, I think, Van Damme, by Dolph Lundgren, who, again, at this point in his career, was on the rise like Van Damme, perhaps not just as going as high as Van Damme at this point in his career, but I think you could tell with Dolph Lundgren here, and it's still quite early in his career, so his acting still isn't what you would describe as brilliant, but you can see he's absolutely eating up scenery playing the villain here, and I think he does particularly well playing the villain character here, Andrew Scott. Really nasty piece of work, but also with layers of comedy too. And I thought, yeah, he made a really good nemesis for the Van Damme character, for Luke Devereaux. And I always had an issue with this film with the ending. And I know the ending, I think, has been I think there's 2 or 3 versions of the ending of this film, from my understanding. I think the only ending I've ever seen, or certainly am aware of, is the one that I'm obviously used to. And that's obviously the confrontation between Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren at like the ranch sort of thing, and they have this epic fight. And that's not the bit I have a problem with. I think the problem I've always had with this film is the fact that in order for Van Damme to beat the Lundgren character, he has to kind of jab himself with that serum to give him his Universal Soldier powers, or give him a boost. And then he's like almost becomes Lundgren's equal again. And I just thought it would have been a much better ending if it had used his more human abilities to beat him, and kind of, reach down and do something that way, be smart about it, and rather than rely on like injecting him with a serum to give him like his superpowers back. I always had a little bit, even when I was younger, the first time I watched it, I've always had a problem with that ending. It just never sat right with me. It was almost like you can't win unless you inject yourself with something to make you win. But that's just me. But I do think this is a fairly strong entry into Van Damme's filmography. I know there are numerous sequels out there, and I don't think I've seen... I think I might, many years ago, was it the second one with Bill Goldberg in? I'm not sure if that is the second one, and I remember it being pretty bad. So I've kind of avoided the rest, but I know there are certainly at least 1 or 2 of them that are fairly decent, and I know there's one with Scott Adkins in, or maybe 2 with Scott Adkins in, that I want to check out, because I've seen like fight scenes from them that look really good and really interesting. So I may, and let me know in the comments if this is something you'd be interested in, I may rewatch or watch the rest of the Universal Soldier films. Let me know in the comments as well what sequence they're going, because I'm not 100% without researching, and I may check them out and give them a watch, because while I don't think this film is outstanding or anything like that, I think it's a solid action sci-fi film with some pretty good action definitely in it, nicely polished, good budget, and some fun performances. So for me, it does sit quite well in Van Damme's filmography. And it is a film that you can certainly enjoy, and I certainly do for the most part. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Van Damme review. I will be back with more reviews and content on the channel very, very soon.